Hello, let's do a September wrap up. Hi, I am Colleen Delaney, and if you are new here, I talk about books and writing, and this is my September wrap up. I am technically filming this on September 29th because I do not have time to film over the next couple days, and I want to get this out at the beginning of October. So I'm not going to finish anything tonight or tomorrow, though, because I have a really, really busy day tomorrow. The only thing I could see myself finishing is I am listening to the audio of In an Absent Dream by Shauna McGuire. And I do have to be in my car a lot tomorrow, so there's a slight chance I might finish my audiobook. I still have like an hour and a half left on it, though, so I'm not going to be in the car that much. So that is the only book that might be on my October wrap-up, and I might finish it in September, but probably not. Moving on from that little caveat, I also wanted to tell you I'm having the most beautiful fall day here. It is absolutely gorgeous out. It's like 58 degrees, sunny, a little windy. The leaves have started to change here, which is fantastic. I went to Starbucks and I'm trying to get off the chai latte train because it's just got way too much sugar in it. So I'm doing chai tea, and this is a chai tea with almond milk. And it's good, but last time I got a chai tea with almond milk and one pump of vanilla, and that's way better. So I'm definitely going to switch back to that. It was expensive, but tasty. Before we jump into the wrap-up, I did also want to let you know the books I picked from Book of the Month because they hadn't released the titles when I did my October TBR, and I did get 3 books. So many of you wonderful, beautiful viewers have been using my code on my Book of the Month video, which I will post below. So I've been getting lots of free add-ons, which is an absolute delight. So I had 5 and I have 2 left because they don't let you get more than 3 books. I did try. I was like, maybe they'll let me because I have this many extra add-ons. They did not. So I have some left over for November, and I have a book in particular that I think I will definitely get in November as an add-on. So my Book of the Month pick was The Family Game by Catherine Steadman. I really wanted to get a thriller. There's the cover of it. It seemed a little bit like the movie Ready or Not, about like a weird group of in-laws. So I'm looking forward to that. And then my add-ons were The Broken Girls by Simone St. James, which is an older one. I've heard so much good stuff about her. And this one, honestly, the creepy cover sold me. And it's like someone investigating the death or disappearance of their sister. I can't remember now. But I'm looking forward to that. And then lastly, I got Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young. I said I really wanted a witch book. And while they did have the second X-Hex book, whose name is escaping me right now, I liked the X-Hex, but I didn't love it. And so I thought I'd give this one a try instead. Give me a witchy book. Thank you for listening to that. Now let's get into the wrap up. In September, I read romance, fantasy, historical fiction, thriller, and graphic novels. And technically magical realism, but we can pop that in with fantasy. So let's start with the romance. So the first romance I read in September was Barbarian Mind by Ruby Dixon. This is the 4th Ice Planet Barbarian book. And honestly, I rated it like a solid read, which is really my middle of the road read rating. And I definitely think that the beginning of this book was way better than the middle end. This is going to be a little spoilery, but the beginning is that this Sakui, who lives away from civilization, has basically raised himself, sees one of the human women and he resonates with her. And he just kidnaps her because he doesn't really understand anything, like language, society, anything. And so they hang out for a long time. Everyone thinks she's dead. And the second half of the book, though, here's the spoilery part, is that she is pregnant and they come back because something's wrong with her health. She's not doing well with pregnancy. And these women are pregnant for a really long time, which sounds awful. But I did not like this part of the book because this part of the book is basically a lot of pregnant women hanging around, chatting all the time. That's not why I read Ice Planet Barbarians, if I'm being completely honest. I don't think that's why any of us read Ice Planet Barbarians. So that part I was I'm kind of off the series, but will I read the 5th one? If I get the ARC, yes. I've been reading all of these via ARC, but if I don't get the ARC, I will probably stop reading the series. It's kind of I don't know. I read this book when I had COVID, and it was perfect because I needed to read something. I couldn't really pay attention. I didn't want anything that was going to get me emotionally upset because I was really congested and I cry very easily. And you know what it's like when you cry when you're snotty. It's disgusting. So it was a good read for something like that. It wasn't a great read. It was fine. Now, the next arc I read was The Duke Gets Even by Joanna Shupe, which is the last book in the Fifth Avenue Rebels series. This book was wonderful. This was a put it in my veins, 5-star read right away. I absolutely loved it. So the main characters in this are the Duke, who we've been following through the entire series because in the first book, he was engaged to the heroine Maddie, who she obviously left him for the love of her life. And then the second book, I can't remember if he was engaged to or just like courting the heroine Alice. And then in the third book, he was really good friends with the heroine Catherine. I was forgetting her name for a minute. So in this, we have Nellie, who's like the fourth best friend out of that group. And she and the Duke are kind of in love with each other and kind of hate each other. And they kind of can't be together because Nellie's like a real outspoken, very sexually liberated woman living in, it's like the late 1800s in New York. And like, she's the person you go to if you need birth control. Like, she's that kind of person. And he's a Duke and he kind of needs someone who's going to be a little more prim and proper to marry. This book was so good. First of all, Joanna Shupe's an amazing writer, but also she has the ability to write like a really simple statement and make it break your heart. So she did this in The Lady Gets Lucky, the second book. And like, if I think about it still, I still cry. And she did it again in this book. And it's such a spoiler, so I'm not going to tell you what it is. But if you can't really DM on YouTube. But if you really need to know, you can click my Twitter handle and you can DM me on Twitter and I'll tell you what it was because it was fantastic and I just loved it so much. I'm really sad this series is over because it's been absolutely fantastic to read it, but I will definitely pick up whatever she writes next. The next romance I read was My Commander by Eliana, I think is how you say her first name, Alder. And this book was okay. This was like borderline not for me okay. I did finish it. So basically the premise of this book is that all these like magical men, they're not all shifters. Some of them are like vampires and some of them are fairies, but this guy's a wolf shifter. Have this spell put out so they can like find their mates. And this woman comes forward as his mate and they have to figure it out. The beginning was fun because he like tries to kidnap her and she like freaks out and like hits him over the head with the back of a toilet. And I liked that part a lot. But here's the problem I had with this book. This book goes from like quirky, the heroine, whose name I can't remember because this book was pretty forgettable, is like a manic pixie dream girl. And I don't like that. Like, it's just the way she was written. I didn't like it at all. Like, her favorite thing to do was like play on her laptop. It's like, what does she want to play? What does she play on her laptop? Is she in a Word document? Is she playing solitaire? So that really bothered me. But the tone of this book is all over the place. So we have parts of the book in which they're like going shopping together and picking out an espresso machine because she's obsessed with coffee. And then there are parts of the book in which the villain is like attempting to sexually assault her. So, and it's like happening. And so it goes from like really dark to really light, back and forth, which just felt odd. Also, I think the cover was very misleading. If you see a cover like this, you assume there's going to be multiple very sexy scenes. There were 2 sexy scenes, I think, in this book, and they were both relatively short comparatively. Like, I always think when you look at like, you know, if you're going to write like a romance novel that's 300 pages, your sex scenes should reflect how long the length of the book is. If you're writing a novella that's 100 pages, the same thing. They should be the correct proportion. So this book, I definitely am not going to read anymore by the author. I picked it up because I'm doing market research for a series that I'm going to release probably in the summer. And this one just missed the mark for me. All right, let's move on to fantasy. So I told myself over Labor Day weekend I was going to read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And then I was very sick. And I started it, but I knew that this was going to be very sad and decided I wasn't going to read it because I thought it would be very upsetting. So I started it and read it very slowly and then did eventually finish it when I was feeling better. And when I finished this book, I thought to myself, like, that was great. But since I've reflected longer, I would say I'd put it closer to the, like, put it in my veins category. Because I really loved this book. But this book through and through is a tragedy. Like, it's a very sad and depressing story about existing in a world where no one can remember you. And it just was really, really sad throughout the entire thing. I did cry my face off during the last, 40-ish pages of the book. But I loved the ending. I thought it ended really, really well. Like, it was a fantastic ending. It was a very clever story. Honestly, it's a hard recommendation for me because a lot of people recommended this book. But like, one of my neighbors asked me what I was reading, and I told her, she's like, oh, should I read it? I was like, I don't know. It's really sad. It's very depressing. It's pretty dark. It's beautiful, though. And the end is very good, but you will cry. And I always feel weird recommending books to people that, like, upset me emotionally. Because I was very emotionally upset for a few days after I read this, which led me to reading the next book that I will talk about. And the perfect antidote to an emotional book hangover like The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue was Other Birds by Sarah Addison Allen. So I was really excited when I saw the book of the month picked this. I've read Garden Spells by her, but that's it. And I read it a long time ago, like 2009 or 10. But I really liked it because they're kind of quiet stories. And after reading Addie LaRue, I needed a quiet story, and this one was perfect. The rhythm of this book was fantastic. It was exactly what I needed. The premise of this book is that there's this young woman who is, I think she's 18. She might be like 18 or 19. And she has inherited her deceased mother's condo on this island off the coast of South Carolina, which I'm pretty positive is fictional. But there's a lot of islands over there, so maybe it's not. So her name is Zoe. And when she gets there, she decides like she wants to meet everybody in the building. And there's very few condos. And everyone keeps to themselves. And there's one neighbor who's like really annoying. And anytime you like step outside, she's like, be quiet. So no one really talks to each other. That neighbor dies immediately. So then Zoe her energy is fantastic, and she kind of like gets all these people to come together. So I would say this is a story of found family. This is magical realism / fantasy because Zoe has an invisible bird that follows her around. There's a lot of weird stuff. There's someone else who lives in the building who like it always wakes up covered in cornmeal because it's like his mother who has died way of saying like she's still with him. Parts of the books are narrated by ghosts. I really love South Carolina. When I was a kid, we used to go there in the summer a lot. And so I really love that like low country feel, which this definitely has. If you want something like to soothe your soul, this is a great book to soothe your soul. All right, let's move to graphic novels. So I actually read 3 graphic novels in September, and 2 of them were Saga, 6 and 7. And I'm like real in depth in this series now. I would say I started it years and years and years ago, but I'm going to try to finish it this year. And it's the story of like intergalactic war. And you follow a family, and you follow a couple other groups of people, but you follow this family made up of a parent from each side of the war and then the child that they've had. I will say the beginning of 6 is like really dark because the end of 5 is really dark. And so 6 is all about like trying to find each other again. And then it ends really hopeful. And then 7 is a pretty hopeful volume until the end breaks your heart. So when I finished it, I was like, oh no, I wish I had volume 8. I get these from the library though, so I have to go to the library and get volume 8 and 9. I think it's 9 volumes. I don't think there's a 10th volume. But if you like science fiction, like epic space opera type stuff, these are great. These do have a lot of really, really graphic imagery, both of like nudity, sex acts, and like horrific violence. So definitely be aware of that going in. I wouldn't recommend these for anyone under 18 because I just think that there's like some pretty, upsetting war images and stuff like that. But I really enjoy these. I put them both at great. I can't wait to finish the series. Next, I read The Moth Keeper by Kay O'Neill. Here's the cover. I got an ARC from NetGalley for this. This is a middle grade graphic novel, and I'd put this at a solid read. I'm going to give you a really weird review that's probably only going to like maybe 1 or 2 people will understand. But this reminded me of Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, which is a video game my brother played incessantly in the early 2000s, I think is when it came out. And I never played it, but he used to play it constantly around me. So the artwork really reminded me of that and sort of like the culture of the people. It's basically about a village where everyone is nocturnal and they take care of this like tree that keeps moths safe. And they have one person who's kind of in charge of it. And it's about the passing of the torch from one person to another. It was a fun, quick read. If you have a middle grader who loves graphic novels, I'd recommend it. It's not really one of those that was like so good. I'd recommend it to adults. It was a solid read for middle graders. Next, I read Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney. I got this as a Book of the Month add-on in September. It was an August book, though, and I'd been deciding on my August books and went with a different one, and then I was kind of sad I hadn't gotten this, so I added it on. This is a sort of like locked island thriller about a family who the matriarch, who's very wealthy, is dying, and she calls them all to her house so they can go over her will. And she lives on this island in which when the tide comes in, the causeway floods, so you're stuck there. And there's a bad storm, and it takes place on Halloween. So if you're looking for like a Halloween thriller, this is the ticket. I would say I like loved this book until the conclusion. Until like, 80% when they start like figuring, even longer than that, maybe 90%. So you start figuring out like actually what happened. And then I didn't really like the ending. So because of that, I put it at a solid read because I do think the atmosphere is fantastic and I really like the characters. I just didn't really like how the mystery concluded. That's just me. A lot of people I think would love it still. It definitely had like Knives Out vibes if you like that. And it also had And Then There Were None vibes, like real big And Then There Were None vibes. And they actually like talk about that in the book, like how it's like And Then There Were None-ish because people start dying one by one, just being picked off. But like a fun thriller if you want to read a really atmospheric thriller this October. And the last book I read in September is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. My first Taylor Jenkins Reid book. I was super excited to read it. And it was great. Borderline put it in my veins. I really loved it. It took me a little while to get into it. And I will say it's not like one of those books where you can't put it down. But like I really enjoyed reading it a lot. It's a fictionalized tale of like a rock band that feels very Fleetwood Mac. And my parents were obsessed with Fleetwood Mac when I was a kid. So like I've been really into Stevie Nicks since I was 5. So I really like the character of Daisy Jones because she's obviously somewhat modeled after Stevie Nicks. But I also really like the character of Karen, who's like the other woman in the band. I loved how Taylor Jenkins Reid's like had each band member answering. It's written like an interview. So they're answering questions, but you don't really get the questions. It's a great story. Honestly, I finished this and Googled like what are the best rock and roll documentaries. I haven't watched any yet. But it made me really want to like read more about how bands work. I'm not a musician. I also then listened to like Fleetwood Mac and Carly Simon for like 5 days straight, and Janis Joplin. Like I was really in the mood for like women rockers of like the 60s and 70s. But if you haven't had a chance to read this yet, I do really recommend it. Like honestly, I make a list of the best books I read in every genre every year to make a video about it. And I'm putting this in my historical fiction because I thought it was fantastic. I know I'm late to the party. And I'm probably going to read more Taylor Jenkins Reid because I did really like this one. So if you've read this one already and you love her, tell me which one I should read next. I'm leaning towards The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, mainly because I think Malibu Rising is the one that takes place in the 80s. And I'm not really an 80s person. I was born in the 80s. But I like much prefer pre-80s or like the 90s if I'm reading something historical fiction, which it's horrifying to me that the 90s are historical fiction. I was in high school then. Those are my September reads. So I had a really good reading month, especially considering that I was pretty ill during it. But I got a lot of good stuff read. There's a couple that I didn't finish yet. I was listening to In an Absent Dream by Shauna McGuire. I've been reading Viviana Valentine Gets Her Man by Emily Edwards. I started A Song So Bright, or what's it called? A Song That Moves the Sun by Anna Bright. So those are just books that I did start but didn't get around to finishing yet. I think I read a chapter of Murder on the Orient Express, but I'll be looking forward to finishing a lot of those in my October wrap-up. But overall, September was a pretty good reading month. What was the best book that you read in September? Did you read a new release that you just fell in love with? Did you read Other Birds, which I really liked? If I had to pick, it'd be really hard to pick a favorite book, but it would be between The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, Daisy Jones and the Six, and The Duke Gets Even. Actually, you know what? It was The Duke Gets Even. That was my favorite book that I read in September. That book was fantastic by Joanna Shoup. So if you had a favorite book, please let me know in the comments. Or if you read one of these month, wouldn't that be amazing? Let me know. And if you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for hanging out. Please drop me a maple leaf. Oh, good. My neighbors are going to mow their lawn right now. please drop me a maple leaf in the comments, and I will see you soon. I hope you are in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book.